Hey there, welcome to episode 67 of the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program. I am your host, Managing Director of the Innovate for Vegas Foundation, Dan Hugo. Recording today's episode 67 on this Tuesday, May 28, 2024. It is the day after Memorial Day, a day which some people treat as a long weekend. Monday, the third day in what is probably really a 4-day weekend. For most veterans, most active duty, retired, separated, military families, it's not necessarily a holiday so much as a day of remembrance. So hopefully you were able to remember those whom you might know or those you never knew who gave all. So, but if you took some time with your family or to take a break from work, I guess that's not too bad. That's what people gave all for. On with the show. So today we're going to talk about the fact that short weeks do not exist, as is so often the case whenever there's a 3 or 4 day weekend. I cannot tell you, this is a universal truth in the United States anyway. Going away for the weekend. Let's get together next week. Let's touch base after the long weekend. Oh, it's a short week. Let's touch base next week after I've had a chance to catch up, et cetera, et cetera. But no, short weeks do not exist. I myself have multiple irons heating in a fire, and it is allergy season here in Vegas. So my voice and I continue to disagree on who gets control over our presentation. Some things that I did get done, some things that I'm still working on. Talk about some of those today. Mostly good, mostly progress. I do not honor the short week myself, so I've been mixing things like sleeping and reading about various new things and old things, and meetings and efforts of various kinds, writing, composing, editing, you name it. So today, short weeks do not exist. Not here anyway. So on with the show. Wherever you found this audio program, hopefully you are able to see a episode description wherein the show notes might be found. You can see the host is me, Dan Hugo, the summary, which I will read to you. Infrastructure as code is a bit of a slog. Does it need to be? That is a good question. We'll save that for the end. Some ideas about Terraform, Pulumi, and a wish list for today's episode, not to mention Project Act, the autonomous cohort tessellation or transformation, if you like, and our most recent board meeting for May 2024, which was last week on Thursday. The links section of the show notes will contain two familiar links. One is our website, our homepage website. The change for our website is yet to be deployed. That's my episode of this very program last week, episode 66. I went into how the order of operations varies depending on if you're outside looking in or inside looking out. So our website is important to me because it's been kind of stuck where it is now, and our website will be our sort of early testing platform for some ideas from MyMuni, Smart Social, etc. But also, it is not as important as Project Act, for example, which got more of my attention this weekend. And will continue to get, it will continue to be priority 0 along with everything else through the week. The next link is our GitHub organization, github.com/innovateforvegas. So our homepage, innovateforvegas.org, FOR, no spaces, innovateforvegas.org, innovateforvegas on github.com. So github.com/innovateforvegas. You can visit our GitHub organization. You can sponsor our efforts if you want. You can also donate from our homepage. There's a nice red donate button. We are a 501c3 public charity in good standing, and we are about to finish our second year of founding, which was June 16th, 2022. So we're coming up on our 2-year anniversary. We'll be entering our 3rd year as a public charity. We are a 1023 EZ filing. So we've had a cap of $50,000 in gross receipts each year for the first 3 years, presuming on the IRS's part that we are an up-and-comer. We have not gotten close to $50,000 in the first 2 years, but let's see how the third year goes. And finally, the Project Act organization on GitHub. It's a separate organization. The idea would be, even though it's starting out with 100% oversight by Innovate for Vegas Foundation, sometimes known as me, but it will ultimately, if everything goes to plan, be a collaboration between multiple individuals and organizations in different places. Hopefully we'll get some language translation going. We'll have a variety of tools to help with discovering civic volunteer organizations and their projects. And then once we get projects, we can work on specific issues or kind of help wanted tasks, so that ultimately, without central planning, without top down, and we'll get into this later as well, we can connect people who want to be a part of open source civic volunteer community elevation projects, plural. We can connect them, the people, with the projects based on individual needs. So rather than perusing catalogs of, the brigade infrastructure for Code for America, which we'll touch on briefly, was not so helpful in this regard. So it was a lot of deep diving. That is what computers are for. So we'll see if Project Act can help create a tessellation or a mosaic of civic volunteer organizations, projects, specific help wanted tasks, and maybe we'll graduate to shared calendars. So you can identify when different people and organizations are having things like office hours, which we had on 23 of May, which is a nice segue to our first item in my notes, our board meeting on May 23rd. So Mary and I constitute our board at the moment. Our fellow sort of founding member of Code for Vegas Foundation, the original co-founder and co-captain of the Code for Vegas, did I say Code for Vegas Foundation? Code for Vegas 10, 12 years ago, when it was part of Code for America. Sean Looker is stepping away to pursue his life. He hasn't lived in Las Vegas for many years, so sort of a booster rocket got us up into a high altitude and then doing some other things. So we did have a guest join, promising. I don't want to say anything until all is said and done, but after we file our annual listing at the end of June of this year, we'll give an update on and maybe we'll even have a joint podcast with our board of directors about our coming third year, all the scope and grandeur of our hopes and dreams and the various projects we're taking part in. We did spend a non-trivial amount of time, given this person's affiliations, on education possibilities. Now, I will remind, since I haven't really talked about it at all in a long time, I'll remind you, gentle listener, that our two capstone projects, and I know educators will find the use of the term capstone to be objectionable in this context, perhaps, but the capstone project, the banner under which all the projects will assemble and form a load-bearing arch, the kind of goal where the journey is a substantial portion of it. One is virtual Vegas, so not a visualization of a digital twin. That's what people usually think of when they think virtual place. Virtual Vegas, like you're going to be flying around. No, not really. That is a thing. Google Earth is an existing example. Some other people are doing things along that line. Aero AI is a company here in Vegas. Founder and chief architect, literally architect, Victory. You can find him at Tech Alley every month talking about drones in Vegas. So they're creating 3D high-resolution visualizations and maps and so on. That's interesting. But the data, the people, I've often asked people, what do you think is a smart city? And they will list off, traffic and weather and air quality and recycling. They'll list a number of things, and then I give it a beat, and I say, what about the people? Oh, yes, that's right, the people. So a virtual Vegas that is based on engagement with people. We can get sensor data, we can get statistics, but what about rolling feedback, including in the conversation, in the data capture, in a privacy-aware way, of course, the people that live here. So virtual Vegas. But the other project that we've had on deck and which received substantial interest until there was a call to action, then it was very silent, is our education capstone, which included notions like we should meet with students and parents and teachers separately together, just getting it going, and try to find out where things are lacking, where the gaps are, why is Southern Nevada public education where it is, where could it be. Co-creation is the whole model of co-creation is to include the people that will be using the product, so to speak, in the design. So here we would ask the students and the teachers, and then the parents, of course, because ideally parents are involved in the education process, get them to actually express some specifics rather than separating the process, the pluses and minuses of it, into the day-to-day and then the bureaucracy, the people that are convinced that they're going to fix it. So that was our beginning, and that's where everybody kind of went, ooh, I'm busy. So the education capstone may get some life breathed, is that even a word? Breathed into it. So we'll see. We do have a to-do list, so we discussed that. And I'll remind you, if you're listening to this audio program, whenever as I'm speaking right now, we do have a calendar embedded in our organization homepage, innovateforvegas.org. So our weekly office hours are on there. The fourth Thursday of each month, not only office hours, but our board meetings, so they coincide almost on purpose, so that anyone is welcome to attend our board meeting. So the board meeting business may or may not take priority, depends on the agenda of the board meeting for that month, and then the people who show up and the topic of interest. So if we can knock the board meeting out quickly, or if the board meeting has pressing matters, we'll figure out who wants to stay for what and so on. It's pretty loose at the moment. Our office hours are on Thursdays, as I said. At present, they used to be at 5 p.m., but 6 p.m. seems to be a happy medium between Pacific time on the west side of the United States. Of course, I'm leaving out Hawaii and Alaska, but Pacific time, UTC -8, 6 p.m. We have a window, 6 to 6:30 on normal office hours days. So if nobody shows up by 6:30, call it a day. But if somebody shows up at 6:29, we'll go until we run out of things to talk about. So that has worked out okay. We've had some office hours that go for an hour or two, some that are just me getting some work done with a camera pointing at me. So whatever works. So the 30-minute window helps with me and how I can spend my time, so I don't kill an hour of silence, because clearly I try to keep it quiet, so when people join, they're not blasted with whatever happens to be on YouTube or whatever. So 6 to 6:30 start time, and then whenever it ends, kind of open-ended, and the topics are mostly civic volunteerism, but it could be technical, it could be non-technical, who knows. It did occur to me, I saw another former Code for America brigade that was advertising office hours, I think on meetup.com, the awful meetup.com website, and I couldn't find it again. So it occurred to me that just as well as projects, there should be an easily discoverable office hours or recurring open meetings, right? If anyone is welcome to join, I mean, subject to code of conduct and so on. But if you are interested and interesting and you want to join, or you are an organizer or leading office hours style or open virtual gatherings, or even in person, but probably virtual gatherings for your projects, for your organization, maybe it's just you. Maybe you want to have office hours. we should make those discoverable just as well as projects and so on. So there is an RDF schema for events. It's iCal. That iCal, it's always showing up somewhere. So it's something we can work on for Project Act. Oh, look, I'm doing these segues great today. So speaking of Project Act, which is literally the subhead for the next section of my notes, we had some discussions. I attended a project meetup, so it wasn't office hours. It was actual, breakout room style weekly project work. So I attended a meeting and talked about Project Act as a way to discover discover organizations and individuals across organizations about projects and where we'd like to go with that. So that was useful. We talked about it during our board meeting. This has been an ongoing sort of research project thus far, with some initial hackery concerning construction, more easily constructing RDF XML files. If you remember last week, the week before, I think it was last week. Yeah, last week, episode 66, I was talking about notation 3, which is visually easier to deal with than XML. There are tools to manipulate. There's a visual VS Code. What is it? Visual Source. Yeah, Visual Source? That's not right. What does VS Code stand for? Visual, whatever it is. Microsoft VS Code, so whatever. Why am I not thinking of VS as it's visual? That's really annoying. Okay, you know what I'm talking about, VS Code. So there's an extension for notation 3 specifically. There are various RDF extensions, so syntax highlighting and other manipulations and so on. There's a RDF library for Python that I've been using to do some transformations. So you can start with your notation 3 and output your RDF XML for posting, etc., etc. So the pieces are floating around. We're integrating so we can help people get up and running. It's super simple. The core of dope and fof, description of a project and friend of a friend, and then even iCal. Very straightforward. So making use of the semantic web, which is already still around. It's been around for a long time. So leveraging that rather than trying to come up with a new, let's just use RSS feeds. Well, RSS version 1 is really simple. RDF site summary. RSS 2 is really simple syndication. RSS 1, RDF site summary. So RSS 1 is an RDF schema that's transformed to XML. RSS 2 is more XML native. So RDF is still around. We can make use of it and make use of it for effective catalog generation, which will make spidering GitHub repos and organization homepages and so on for their dope and fof and other such files, just like RSS feeds. So you can publish these, and then anyone who wants to generate a catalog or find people, if you link them through the fof schema, but if you link them through the fof connection scheme that is found in the fof schema, nose, group, there are some terms that already work. So if you connect your organization, your group to another group, so you each are in each other's fof, and you can find some people are using this for web rings. So if you're in the friend of a friend, it's sort of a decentralized social network, right? So I can tell you who all the people are that I'm following. There's also the XFN metadata standard, which is used to verify your identity, for example, in Mastodon. So you would say the relationship is me when you link to your Mastodon profile, for example. So Mastodon server / my username, etc. So there are a variety of ways to embed. So fof is a little bit more flexible. So fof for the organizations and individuals who are peers in a network or tessellation of civic volunteers, and then dope, description of a project, so that we might learn more about individual projects that each organization is pursuing. Dope and fof, RDF files saved as RDF /XML, so they're XML files. can be placed in GitHub repositories, on home pages, maybe elsewhere. So pretty flexible. There's no need to necessarily join a Discord or a Slack or sign up for something. And if you want to leave, just unpublish those files. And so one of the policies of Project Act could very well be if you want to depart, if you are no longer, maybe you're disbanding, maybe you are not interested, maybe you're pursuing other organizational schemes, just unpublish or indicate that you don't have to unpublish your FOF, for example, but in your FOF, you can either delete it or you can remove the connection to Project Act as one of your friend organizations. So pretty straightforward. These are all things that we'll be documenting in our project documentation on our GitHub to start. So we have Project Act, Project-Act, ACT.info, which will be where you can find information about the Project Act. And we also have Project Act.world, which is where we'll more display for the casual person, or to make it Project Act.info is where you would end up if you are constructing your RDF files or you're connecting to the peer loose decentralized network. How do you do it? How do I edit this? What should it look like? Here's the source code for a spider that you can run yourself also to create your own catalogs and things. Project Act.world will be sort of the public facing, and ideally it won't be just the United States. Ideally it will not only be in English. Ideally it will not be limited to people with completely functional sight, hearing, and so on. I know my sight is not what it used to be, and certainly my voice is not. So we should not be focusing on signing up and central planning with a central authority and so on. That already didn't work as well as it could have, maybe. The idea with central planning not doing so well, perhaps we could level the playing field and enable decentralized peer-to-peer discovery and communication. Let's see if that works. The investment is much lower. There's no need to be an organization. It should work for individuals, which is a great segue into the next subhead in my notes, local orgs, organizations. So the Brigade program created a patchwork of locally organized volunteer groups that were beholden to a top-down infrastructure. So you were probably a fiscally sponsored entity. Fiscal sponsorship is an IRS thing. It's not new. It becomes tricky if your fiscal sponsor is I don't think it becomes super tricky. And I am not a professional tax preparer, nor am I a tax attorney, nor am I an attorney of any kind. But I believe it becomes tricky if you have so many fiscally sponsored entities. You can do projects or organizations. So projects are not intended to be permanent. And then fiscally sponsoring an organization is more straightforward. Typically, the way I've read the latter, if you are a nonprofit, when you form your nonprofit corporation, whatever your state is, it varies per state what you have to do and so on. You create your nonprofit. There's a window between now, you've formed your corporation, you filed your paperwork, you have your business ID or whatever you need in your state, you got your EIN, you're cooking with gas. So then you can file your 1023 if you intend to be a large nonprofit charity. So nonprofit state designation charity, 501A is a collection of different tax-exempt organizations. 501c3 is tax-exempt. I'm not going to focus on terminology, but 501c3 is really the only one that counts for tax-deductible donations, which is why when you see things like Google for nonprofits, when you read the fine print, it's Google for 501c3 charity organizations that are not education or, I believe, religion-based. I may be misspeaking on the religion part, but typically you'll find, are you in the question to qualify or to begin a process to apply, are you a charity? Yes. Are you involved with education? Like, are you an educational institution? We are arguably educational since we help develop job skills and whatnot, but we are not an educational entity. So we're more of a community service or civic volunteerism organization. That's literally what we are. So once you form your nonprofit, you can be fiscally sponsored by an existing 501c3. And so any donations, any sponsorships, any funds that come in, should you for any reason fail to get your IRS determination in a timely fashion, this may be off-putting to some donors. So it helps with making tax-deductible donations that are deductible immediately because they are donated to a 501c3 organization in their name. The donation is made to your fiscally sponsored organization, but the money is passed through the the fiscal sponsor. So we did this for our first 2 months, just in case it was going to take longer. There's always an opportunity for especially a 1023 determination to get bounced back, and that may be problematic for some donors if you're looking for large donations. We filed a 1023-EZ, so that has it's a 3-year, $50,000 capped gross receipts on any sort of donations or sponsorship or anything. We have not even come close to that. So the 1023-EZ process is super easy, just like in the name. So we still did the fiscal sponsor arrangement, but we didn't. It was unnecessary anyway. So if you have a sprawling network of brigades, all fiscally sponsored by, and in fact under the thumb of a central authority, and then that central authority decides to shut everything down, if you weren't already a nonprofit, like you filed as a nonprofit corporation in the particular state, your locality, everything you need to do that, you're kind of left hanging. So local orgs and the brigade infrastructure were a little bit, in my opinion, too beholden to this top-down infrastructure, even though they were locally organized. So some captain or co-captains putting in their time and their effort, organizing other local individuals, maybe doing it virtually, especially post-pandemic or during, inviting people to participate from wherever. So maybe you're welcome to join a project regardless of where you are, although in some cases people do ask that because of the nature of some projects, that you have a sort of a vested interest, skin in the game, as they might say. So it can become a gray area. Either way, since Code for America has sunset the brigade program, it leaves a lot of former brigades, local organizations who may have been fiscally sponsored and not structured as nonprofit corporations or equivalent in their state, kind of leaves them hung out to dry, perhaps, in some cases. So this is one of my experience with that process, which we were not directly involved with because Code for Vegas Foundation never joined Code for America as a brigade. Code for Vegas, the original from 12 years ago, I think it was 12 to 10 years ago, formal Code for Vegas organization, not foundation, was part of Code for America, but it was not like a Code for Vegas brigade of Code for America. So I think it was very early in the whole notion of brigades, fiscal sponsorship, and so on. But either way, Code for America claimed ownership of the Code for Vegas name, not a fight to fight. And in the end, they kicked everybody out anyway. So one important notion, though, is that local organizations could be just one person. It certainly feels like that. And they won't need to be a formal nonprofit corporation or similar. They could be their own. Well, it's tricky to form it's tricky to form a charity. You can form a nonprofit depending on your state. So here in Nevada, for example, you can form a one-person corporate entity. That is allowed. I've checked on that. So you need one person, you fill all the roles, and if you happen to be a resident here, you can be the registered agent, or sometimes they call it resident agent. So you are located in the state. You can file the paperwork. You have a local address. your statutory address, etc. So technically one person could form a nonprofit, but really you want to enable, hey, my brigade shut down. I still want to participate in civic volunteer projects. I think it was fun. It was educational. It was good, right? Hopefully people feel that way. So, but I'm just one person. What do I do? Clearly, that person could work on projects locally, but it's tricky to do a one-person show. The army of one is not as fun as it sounds. So that person, that individual, should be able, might be encouraged, should be allowed, might even be welcome to join other projects and to participate remotely. So now, anyone who wants to contribute to volunteer time on civic-minded projects, projects that they find interesting, maybe the organizations or individuals running the projects find them interesting, so they should be able to discover each other. They should be able to come together and collaborate to whatever degree. Now, one of the tricky things is, do you have to join another organization? Everybody will have a different policy. Some say you must join the organization, and what that means is you join as a member of their GitHub organization, or maybe on GitLab or similar. Maybe there's a formal process where you go through a ceremony of some sort, but you are formally part of some organization. In other cases, and this is much more common in the open source development world, you might want to contribute to a project without being a member of that project. So you can be a contributor without being a code owner. You don't have to be a member of a GitHub organization or similar. You don't have to join something. You can issue a pull request, or you can submit a patch, or whatever the workflow is for a particular organization and their projects, or a particular project. And hopefully you get some sort of mention. You're listed in the contributors and so on. That may be interesting. And in fact, as an individual contributor, maybe you have some time. Maybe you want to spend Fridays, some 20% project, as they call it, some companies. Maybe you say, hey, I would like to spend some time on open source projects and contribute some of my time and my skills, my expertise. Now you have to find projects. You have to figure out where you can spend a few hours every week. So just getting to that point might take the few hours every week. So one of the ideas would be for organizations in the tessellation working on projects where they need some expertise or some help wanted, as they say. You can tag issues as help wanted. These are issues that are either good for newcomers to a project, or introductory, junior, I'll say coders, but it could be anybody. Or it could be, if we view it in a more general sense, it could be an issue that needs some attention, just like help wanted implies. So if you have some time, a couple hours a week, you'd like to do civic volunteer projects, you have no local former brigade or similar, so maybe you never did, maybe they shut down. So you have some time, you have some experience, you're an open source developer of some sort. Maybe you're not even a developer. Maybe you like to work on projects, but you are a language translator or a QA tester or a marketing person, or you do graphic illustration, or you do video production, or the list goes on and on. So the notion that in order to be a civic volunteer, you must write code, that goes out the window. So once you are able to find, I'll say organizations, but it could be one person. You find organizations, you find the projects they're working on, and you find issues that might be in your purview. How about that? So that's, generally speaking, the nature of the Project Act version 1, I guess, undertaking. So the tessellation should be a mosaic that splays out for you to see organizations of one or more people with projects, maybe 0 or more projects, with hopefully we'll call it 1 or more projects. If they have 0 projects, then hopefully they'll get to 1. And then each project that has any open issues that they're looking for particular help on it, right? So if that becomes discoverable in an automated way, then you can spend your time as a individual contributor wanting to put a couple of hours a week in, and spend the time doing that rather than trying to navigate discovery first. Like, who is working on what? How do I even find them? And we can go from there. It's an experiment, but super low overhead, not requiring meetings, not requiring infrastructure, not requiring the construction of other fiscal sponsoring organizations and relationships and so on. By the way, that's getting more complicated since the Open Collective Foundation, it was shutting down. They were a fiscal sponsor for several of the former brigades, so that makes things a little bit tricky. So local organizations are going through a transition, I suppose. I will say again, with Code for Vegas and now Innovate for Vegas Foundation, Code for Vegas Foundation, Innovate for Vegas Foundation, we're never a part of Code for America. We are not former brigades. Code for Vegas was sort of pre-brigade. So other than my profoundly disappointing interactions with Code for America as in summer and fall of 2022, when Project Act, I found the discussion. I believe it was October 27, 2022 was the first public, quote unquote public. It was in LinkedIn direct messages, which are horrible. But the first time the discussion of Project Act escaped voice phone calls with two people on the call, right? So Project Act first mentioned October 27. We formed a GitHub organization to get things started, but then when the ACT project, the Alliance of Civic Technologists, started, it became, and then the Code for America rug pull plans, sunset plans, became apparent middle of 2023. It was March 2023, I think. So they pushed the actual sunset to the end of 2023, but once it became apparent, once ACT formed, the notion of Project ACT, the Autonomous Cohort Transformation Project, to try to help organizations become independent, just like Innovate for Vegas Foundation, seemed moot, but then now it seems more interesting than it ever was. Still, autonomous cohort transformation as one of the potential projects, something we could focus on. In some cases, it's a transformation from nothing, as in we don't have an organization. Where do we start? So still valid. Don't need to step away from Code for America anymore. But the tessellation project will get much more attention. Discovery, communication, collaboration, and then start over and do it again. Whatever the size of the local group, and they don't even have to be local, like physically local, geographically local. They may be a virtual group of one or more people, so they can get together virtually from wherever. The smaller peer group, so I've talked a lot about central planning being a negative. Central planning, when it's a group of 3 or 4 people or 10 people, that's a way to focus time where people are in the same room or in the same video call. They're communicating on a regular basis. Ideally, there's less bureaucracy. So smaller teams, it may be, what's the management number? It's like 7 people. You shouldn't have more than 7 people reporting to you. So if there's a mini hierarchy of 7 people, that's not central planning so much as coordinated collaboration. So if you have groups of people that can work together, and maybe there's a loose hierarchy at the local level, so you have project leads, you have project manager type, these roles, these are real roles. They should have people doing them, or at least paying attention. So if you can do that, that's not quite the central planning problem. That's more focused organization. And then you as a group, as a small, intimate collection of individuals contributing their time, and you can look each other in the eye. Now you can say, what would work better is more of a flattened structure, or maybe much more direction from the top of our little hierarchy here. Maybe smaller hierarchies, maybe tiger teams of 2 or 3 people. You can make those decisions depending on what works for you. Central planning is where some mystical authority in a faraway place is telling you what to do, giving you direction. My favorite is when paid employees are telling volunteers what to do and then not giving them credit. So central planning is not great with scale, because central planning doesn't take into account some of the realities on the ground, and that's why centrally planned governments don't do well if they grow too big. Centrally maintained projects. So you can, because someone will be listening to this and say, well, what about the Linux kernel project, for example? So the Linux kernel is not centrally planned in that anyone, can maintain your own fork. You can submit a patch. You can develop a driver for your particular hardware. You can port to completely new hardware. You don't have to ask. You're not necessarily being endorsed. What will often happen is someone will do a port. They will submit a patch based on something that they have encountered in a proposed solution. There will be some cursing from Linus Torvalds, and then some ultimate determination about whether a patch is accepted. So that's central maintenance. You can patch the kernel and run it all day. You can fork it. You can publish a patch that someone can apply if they want. So you are not being told what to do and what not to do. The question is whether you are participating directly in the centrally maintained project, since it has so much impact on so many things. So there's like the authoritative version, but you are free to do whatever you want. You can be a part of the Linux Foundation, sponsorship, funding, etc. You don't have to be that either. So central planning is a little bit more structured and a little bit more rigorous and a little bit more, I was going to say draconian, but I'll just say authoritarian. Draconian maybe. But anyway, so I think trying a decentralized approach with a level playing field, so to speak, with discovery, communication, collaboration, tooling, making use of technologies and methods that have worked for years. A little water there, sorry, is a reasonable experiment to try, because we can just try it. We don't have to. Technically, it would be nice to have one other organization of one or more people, so that we can try out the the FOAF discovery mechanisms, the DOPE discovery mechanisms, and then eventually the granular help wanted issue discovery mechanisms, and then the iCal thing. Like if you can figure out, hey, there's 25 former brigades. Here's their network. Here's their tessellation. 5 of them have office hours. So if you could just discover that without having to go looking at websites like ours, you can just get a catalog of, here are the 5 organizations, civic volunteer organizations, that have office hours, and maybe in a calendar or tabulated. A calendar would be more convenient, of course. So the iCal schema could be fit into that. So not hard. So local organizations aren't going anywhere. They don't disappear. And they also aren't told what to do from on high. Finally, some thoughts about infrastructure as code. I've read a couple of articles about this. Pulumi is an interesting idea. They tout the polyglot use. You can program in C# or Python or JavaScript / TypeScript or Go or even a YAML declarative syntax, which sounds cool until you start looking for so how do you do this? Well, this is only done in TypeScript. We only have a working example. Async is only implement asynchronous code execution with waiting on responses and whatnot. Only implemented in TypeScript. Well, you're not really polyglot. You're competing against yourself with different features in different languages and so on. So it is a work in progress. I've mentioned this previously when I was talking about this more in depth with the OpenTofu / Terraform thing. I started using Terraform when it was at version 0.10, maybe. I had to run the 0.11 migration stuff. So very early. It has matured quite a bit. That's why everybody loves it, because even though it's very much like JavaScript, it's awful, but it is the best awful thing because it's been around the longest and everybody's using it. So Pulumi is interesting. Not totally jumping up and down for joy, but ultimately it will be worth knowing how Pulumi works and how OpenTofu works and whatever IBM does with HashiCorp, since IBM is acquiring them for, $6 billion? So Terraform is going to do whatever IBM wants to do with it. OpenTofu project is getting funding from Linux Foundation or support in general. I haven't looked at the the numbers. I don't know what they've published, but OpenTofu project forked Terraform from their last, was it BSD? BSD 3 clause, I think. So we'll see where OpenTofu goes. Pulumi is open source, hopefully forever. We'll see. So having a few tools in the toolbox is useful. The declarative definition of orchestration of infrastructure is not simple. It's not a simple matter to get around. So it's neither simple for the person orchestrating if you're not familiar with declarative, and even then it's kind of a pain. It's also not easy to get around on the implementation side because, and I'm going to make a comparison to a circuit board because that's what I've been thinking about this weekend. So if you imagine, software, if you're a coder, you think you probably think either procedurally or functionally, if you like, but you presume that you have an entrance and an exit from a block of code and variables and so on. So declarative and the way infrastructure is orchestrated, it's a little bit more like an SQL query where everything sort of runs at the same time. Or if you were a visual person, you build up an illustration, maybe you're a painter or a sculptor or something, you build up your project in layers. So each layer exists and then you move on to the next one. So you may be constructing the layer in a linear sequence, but the layer reaches some point and then you move on to the next layer. So if you're painting, if you're building a sculpture, you start by throwing, or maybe you're doing what's the spinning thing? And you throw the clay on the wheel and it starts spinning. You do your initial shaping and then you add a handle or something. So there are different steps that presume a certain kind of atomic state. Okay, so none of this is particularly new, but you're asking typically software people who are designing the architecture, or maybe you have a DevOps person, they have to think in terms of declarative architecture, describing or defining their orchestration of different resources. If you're a coder especially, you're thinking like, okay, I want to run some code that says if server count equals 3, and even that was tricky in Terraform, and it's still not the way a programmer thinks. So Pulumi is implemented, don't learn a new language, use the language you already know. Okay, you're still using their polyglot approach to build what is essentially a declarative plan. The plan is executed and the resources are orchestrated. So you can run into some trouble if you have two resources that need to exist kind of at the same time. So just like making a pottery wheel? Is that what it's called? The pottery has to exist, and then there has to be a handle. So there is a natural order of things, but from a certain perspective, they both exist at the same time. If you're painting, the two halves of the painting exist at the same time, even though you're kind of presuming that the one color over here will flow into that color over there. So there's a lot of ways where procedural thinking can really get in the way of, declarative thinking can really get in the way of what needs to be sort of procedural in context. So, for example, 2 examples. One, if you are creating on AWS, if you're creating a Route 53 zone file and a domain record, you will often have to verify ownership with your registrar. So you'll put in a text record on your registrar side, and then the Route 53 will verify it, or you can verify with email, I think, but the DNS record thing is easier to automate. So you may be assuming, okay, I'm going to configure Route 53. I'm going to verify the domain. I'm going to configure an SSL cert with the Amazon certificate service, ACS, I think it is. Well, the domain verification is not instantaneous, so that blocks the creation of it's a TLS cert really, because you have to verify ownership of the domain, which you would do in Route 53, right? You because once your registrar is pointing to your name server, now it's now it's going to point traffic to your Route 53 zone file with your records in it. So now you want to add a verification record for your certificate permission grant, I guess, whatever they call it. So you have to wait for the zone file to be validated, I guess, I can't remember what the term they use, once ownership has been verified, and then the SSL cert can be granted or provisioned for your domain based on verification in your Route 53 record. And then you can load it into the load balancer or however you're going to be making use of it in the Amazon Web Services infrastructure. So these things happen in a sequence because you're declaring them in some approaches. You declare that they will all exist at the same time, and you hope that things go as you hope they will. Like, oh, my certificate provisioning failed because my Route 53 ownership verification failed, because my DNS ownership verification failed to create the zone file. So all these things will fail if you don't account for the fact that they happen in a sequence, even though you may declare them. So that you can get around that. But the fact is you have to actually get around that. And it sort of becomes a little bit of what we call a kludge. So you're like, oh, except for this one case. Another example is if you're setting up multi-account peering, so VPC peering across accounts, across regions, you have to set up a peering relationship. So you have to do a peering request from one, say you have two accounts. So one account sends a VPC peering request to the second account. So A requests B, hey, I want to be a peer. And then B receives the request and accepts the request. So that acknowledgement goes from B back to A. So you now have two different orchestrations that have to happen in a request accept sequence, but you do have to wait. So just like the DNS record or ownership verification, right? So updating a record to initially, what is it? Yeah, you have to claim ownership, and then you have to update your DNS name servers, primary, secondary, etc. So yeah, these things, declarative, same time, reality, sequential, blocking, etc. Now, these are not impossible to deal with, but it is something to deal with. And to me, it seems odd that there's always these gotchas. And so I think the nature, and I've started to come across some articles. I think the Terraform, the HashiCorp license change, and now the acquisition, the OpenTofu fork, Pulumi, kind of up and coming. Each platform, I know for sure, Azure, Google, maybe as much, but certainly AWS and Azure have been focusing on toolkits to enable provider interfaces and so on, so you can automate your provisioning and your orchestration. So things are moving along, but to me, it seems like I'm almost thinking does anybody remember LabVIEW? You would put down a component like, okay, the resource, if you like. Here's a measurement device. Here's a sensor. Here's an oscilloscope. I'm going to send it some configurations. It's going to, so you'd have a physical interaction, probes and whatnot. But you could say, here's an oscilloscope, and it's going to send output to this other block, like a strip chart or a hard drive or a database or some calculation block, or it's going to be a part of a decision, whether to flip a switch and do some chemical reaction in a vessel that you have a temperature sensor on. So you could construct an entire experiment visually, and so the experiment exists in a declarative, everything is laid out on this visualization, visually programmed, even though things will be happening in a sequence. So, your reactants enter on the left, you have a reaction, you have the sensors, you have some electrochemistry that you're detecting on your oscilloscope for some reason. Maybe you want to do that. And then there's going to be a measurement that's measured, and then it's analyzed. And then maybe it flips a switch when a certain reaction state is measured, and then some of the products can flow to another, whatever you're going to do, you can execute this thing. So you orchestrate, just like a web request comes in and it follows a pipeline through your infrastructure. So declaring your infrastructure and running it are already sort of all at one time or atomic versus sequential pipelining, etc. So to me, the way that visual programming has worked, and that could be a circuit board schematic, that could be something like LabVIEW, it could be any kind of a flow chart. I'm curious to know why there are libraries like Diagram, I think it's Diagram, is a Python library that has built-in icons for the big three, at least: Amazon, Azure, Google Compute Cloud, Google Compute Platform, so GCP. So you have these icons and you can programmatic. Well, all you're doing is building a diagram. That doesn't seem to be converted to code very easily. So to me, what if you started with like a circuit board layout application or schematic capture, right? So schematic capture, you're describing your implementation. You want different nets to be connected in certain ways. They will all be connected at the same time. That is to say, the board will exist with all of the devices in your schematic soldered down onto a board at the same time, right? So they will be orchestrated on a circuit board. And then when you apply power, certain sequential things will happen. So to me, this is a much closer analog, a visual programming analog. So that you have a schematic. I want to attach a load balancer with inputs and outputs. I want to have a configuration, signal, conditional, whatever. So very much like connecting digital components on a circuit board, they're all connected, all together on a schematic. So you're doing nets. And then when you want to create a Gerber file, you want to actually implement it, you take your schematic, you do schematic capture, and you turn that into a board layout, and then you can physically route signals. So that part you hopefully can automate. But you would say, I need a front end, I need a gateway to an internet, a public internet, I need a virtual cloud, or I need some sort of a bastion subnet, I need routing, I need a certificate, I need a DNS service. So you can do services and so on. So those could be blocks that are connected on your nets. You have a net list, which is connected to which. You can do layers. The layers would be done in the schematic capture. Once you have, four layer circuit board, you're gonna have a power plane, a ground plane, power signal, ground signal. So you might have, and then you have vias connecting them. So this has been done in the real world with all sorts of analog considerations, right? That's why you have a ground plane there. But the fact is, you can do moats, you can do keep out zones, all this stuff. This problem has been, I won't say solved, but it's been addressed on the schematic net list generation to schematic capture and layout, footprint, keep out zone, layering via signaling results. So to me, this workflow seems like it would be an interesting way to apply infrastructure orchestration. Not only can you get a visualization built in, but you can actually, rather than doing the plan file, you should be able to output your current infrastructure and visually or programmatically, but you should be able to come up with the net lists at least to compare directly without drift management. Right now is a thing, but also how do you, they call it back annotation. How do you take what might be your schematic that you captured, turned into a layout with multiple planes, right? So you have, like I said, you have your power plane. Did I say planes? I think I said layers. Your power plane, your ground plane, between on either side of the ground plane, you have signal planes. So you can call them layers. You could do the same thing with infrastructure. So you can have one plane or layer is your DNS configuration, your permission configurations. You can have a public moat, right? You don't want signals going between the public part of the board and the private part, or you want to have a definite trace that you can identify without miscellaneous random traces also going in. Oh, I didn't know that was routing a signal from a 12 volt rail to a 3.3 volt, whatever. You can actually program this, and it should be the output of so if you have a board designer, the output of the Gerbers won't necessarily be deterministic, right? That might vary with the talents of and the special needs of your signaling and so on. But at the end of the day, you should be able to inspect drift. You should be able to find bugs. You should be able to have visual documentation. But all of this should be programmatically manipulatable, because schematics exist and they are generated and so on. So is it KiCad? KiCad? There are several CAD programs that do schematic capture. There are other ways to do it. Maybe even do something like Blender. But as long as you could render, what if you could render a SVG file as the output, your schematic capture? There are standard ways of doing schematic capture and importing net lists into board layout, so that might be useful. But if you do something that already has an authoring and attribute framework and a visualization rendering framework and a transformation pipeline, so XML, so SVG is XML, so XML has all those things. SVG has authoring, visualization. You can attach attributes to SVG nodes. So anyway, that's the kind of things I've been thinking of. I think orchestration of infrastructure, the infrastructure as code challenge, will continue to be a thing. The reason I'm spending time on it is I don't want to spend time on it later. So I'd like to have some infrastructure as code that works, because we are going to be deploying similar infrastructure for various projects. So the 4.Vegas project in general, Talks.Vegas, which I really want to make useful, and Challengers.Vegas to recognize and celebrate people who are innovative in our corner of the world. Those projects should be deployable, should be implementable, deployable, customizable, integratable with a minimum of fuss. So having working examples, including infrastructure orchestration, will go a long way. It's a pre-reduction of front-end unloading of tech debt. So it's more than our public website. Although that's a good place to start, eating our own dog food, as I've said before. So all of these projects will benefit from a solid starting point, and it's a good way to publish an open source project so that people can make use of it, is to show a working, completely functional example. Really, the cool way to do it is from bare metal. So this is similar. Anybody who's familiar with the old days of make config, and then make install. So that was at the auto config tool chain best practices. Those have kind of gone by the wayside, but the ability to get a tarball, as we used to say back then, still do. You get a tarball, you run make config, it makes sure you have the right sources, libraries, and include files and headers and build tools, and it checks the version of this and that and the other thing and whatever. It gives you a full rundown, and then you make the project based on the configuration. So it has checked to make sure that the compiler and the header files are the right versions and that they're actually there. Then make install puts the resulting distribution output in the right place, and then you're up and running. So something similar for projects is a good way to go, and what you end up with a lot of projects is a description. First, you have to go get this. You have to make sure you have that. So it's a description, which is useful, but the automation of that, which leaves out a lot of the I don't know what to do next. If you automate that, it says, oh, your system has everything you need. Let's build the thing. Here's how you deploy it. So a lot of these things can be automated. Same goes with infrastructure as code. I personally think we're getting a little weird, but we'll see. So the Pulumi stuff, I will hopefully have something worth looking at as a starting point for the various projects I just mentioned, which I will commit to Definitely our Innovate for Vegas GitHub, but also possibly to Project Act so that we can deploy some things for the world version of the website at least, which I presume will be interacting with the info content as far as the catalogs and to render images and create stuff. But who knows? So having a working, reproducible infrastructure, codified, not left to chance, is always a good start. And I hope we have only just begun with how that works. So that is where I'm going to leave today's audio program. I thank you for listening as always. And I will remind you that we do have our office hours every Thursday. Go to our website, innovateforvegas.org. If you're interested in participating, we use Jitsi Meet, which is an open source virtual meeting, like video conference platform. I like Jitsi Meet because it's open source. I met the CEO a long time ago. I think he has moved on long ago. But one of the sponsoring companies, I think the main sponsoring company, is a company called 8x8, which does commercial office communication solutions, telephony, video, etc. So Jitsi is a completely and totally workable platform that you don't have to pay for. It's all open source, but also you can use it. You can set up a Jitsi Meet. There's no time limits. There's no hard limits or practical limitations on the number of people who can participate, but there's no, you can only have 5 people for 40 minutes. None of that. So we have Google Workspace for our nonprofit. That's all well and good. We can do a Google Meet, but the point was to demonstrate that anyone can create virtual meetups, office hours, work sessions, etc., without shelling out money for a Zoom subscription, without having to pay for different, don't have to sign up for Google Workspace, don't have to sign up for this or that, Teams, or whatever. So no time limits, etc. So that was the point there, and Jitsi has worked okay. Every once in a while, somebody will run into some weird behavior, but that's how the world works sometimes. So we'll see what comes of it. Don't forget to check out our website, innovateforvegas.org. Visit our GitHub if you want. We do have a Discord server, which has been essentially a ghost town for a few months, coming up since we participated in the NASA Space Apps Challenge in October 2023. It's been pretty quiet. I've been spending more time on the Project Act Discord, which is also very quiet, but mostly on the GitHub organization, our code of conduct, which is kind of the boilerplate from, I cannot remember the thing, but everybody uses it. Code of conduct, conduct covenant, something like that. You could visit our site and our GitHub org and see the contributing document that goes through various things to participate in this project, to contribute to it. They're pretty straightforward, nothing really draconian, just, be a good person and some other details. And then we'll get started on the actual tessellation project, try to roll in some of the things I've been doing for constructing. Really the thing I'm trying to get to work correctly is the merging of multiple Notation 3 documents to enable easy localization, so we can translate different elements of things and construct a properly constructed RDF XML document for publication. So the source files could be in, there's the non-localized set of terms, of parts of the RDF, so links to repositories and so on. And then there's the project description, the short description, the name of the project. There might be a couple of other things. And that's just the beginning, right? That's just a basic dope entry. So we should be able to localize those. There's already language selectors in place. That's not the problem. But what I'd like to do is make each of the localizations. So if you want to add a localization, you're adding a source file to your localization directory. If you have other documents, we have we have the ability to localize our documentation if anybody needs to. There's Git localize is like a free service for open source projects, etc., etc. So making all this work is just removing roadblocks for other people who might want to join. That's where we are on that. Anyway, I'm running over time, clearly. So I thank you for listening again. Don't forget, we are a public charity. Support from our adoring public is essential. It doesn't have to be financial, but just to know you care enough to listen and to tell a friend about this audio program. And maybe you'd like to be a guest sometime. We can do that too. Thank you for listening. Take care.